Welcome, Be Emboldened audience. We are so glad to have you here today for a live stream with Kat, our vice chair of the board and executive director and founder, Naomi Wright. I'm Natasha, your board chair, and hosting this discussion today about Hillsong. You may have heard of them, even if you only know them by their music, but they are a mega church that is global. And so it's likely you've been impacted them in some way, if not by their culture, then by their music. And we are talking about the docu-series that have come out in the last year and a half or so, one in 2022, one in 2023, about Hillsong. There's one called Hillsong Exposed, Megachurch Exposed, and The Secrets of Hillsong. So between the three of us, we have watched these docu-series. Some of us have watched one, some of us has watched the other, so we're excited to kind of give you a full picture of what these docu-series bring to the table related to Hillsong. So Naomi and Kat, glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So I was messing, I had everything hooked up wrong. So I was like talking to these and trying to listen out of this and, some fixing all that. And so when you finally came through for me and I could hear you, I hear you go like, maybe you've heard of them. And I thought you were talking about us. I'll be like, no, I highly doubt they have actually, but I don't know why they're here.
Who are these people? Why are they talking about this?
Why does YouTube think I want to look at them?
Yeah, I like TV. That's no.
Well, that is a good point, Naomi. And so if you haven't heard of us, we are Be Emboldened, and we exist for those impacted by spiritual abuse. We provide support and services to prevent victimization and re-victimization. We want to create a safe space to ask hard questions, to heal, and to rebuild, which is why we're talking about Hillsong, because there is some stuff that has gone down that you should probably know about, that we have learned about, and that we want to talk about how that relates to spiritual abuse, the work that we're doing, and just how to think about this, how to think about these docuseries that are coming out related to topics of violent cults and spiritual abuse, and maybe some of the things we can learn from this docuseries. Mm-hmm. So with that, Naomi or Kat, unless you have any other opening comments, we can dive into the questions that I've prepared to facilitate this discussion. But for audience members, anyone watching, whether you're watching live or you're watching in a replay, we'd love to hear your questions. So please feel free to put those questions in the chat at any time or in the comments below if this has already happened. And we would love to answer those questions and get you the information you need.
I don't think I have any comments other than I'm excited to talk about this because watching it was so interesting for me because I love their music, like I was so connected to it. And I don't think I'm alone in that. Obviously, it's a widespread phenomenon. But yes, I'm looking forward to talking through this with you ladies.
All right.
Yeah, well, I don't have any. Sorry, I don't have anything either. I just nod. Yes, agreed.
Let's dive in. Okay, so as we were watching these two docuseries, what were some of the toxic cultural red flags that former volunteers, members, college students described in their experience with Hillsong?
I mean, so I saw Hillsong Exposed, and I can kind of jump in. So that's the HBO one, if people are curious. And one of the quotes that I wrote down is like, it's like cool church. So you don't have to deal with your sin because no one's really asking about it. I think that was one of the former volunteers, which this was sort of similar to some of the other documentaries that we've discussed, really depended on its volunteers. So like a really powerful volunteer force that was kind of necessary because you did see kind of at the top of that pyramid, which again, the fact that there's even kind of a hierarchy within the church leadership is an issue. And you saw within that there was this one pastor that was really discussed that we'll get into. And just showing him and his kind of cool Instagram lifestyle, like wearing really expensive clothing. That was some of the red flags. And then I remember they talked about a VIP section, like in the New York church. You couldn't sit wherever you wanted. So there was a VIP section to get to the front of the stage. It was almost like, you don't have the pass, you didn't pay the extra $300 for VIP tickets, but it's church. So thought that was really interesting. We can kind of dive into that more, but those are some thoughts off the top of my head. If you guys had any to add to that, I guess.
Wow. So that was not mentioned in the one I watched, and I've seen two of, I believe there's actually three docuseries out there about Hillsong, and so I've seen two of the three, and I didn't hear that mentioned, that VIP piece of it. So I'm just curious, did you sort of like kind of off the cuff, you were saying 300 is like an example, or did they actually say what it costs to be there?
Oh, I don't think they actually paid. I was just more equating it to a concert venue. So
Oh,
like
got it.
paying more, but the VIPs were, you know, the celebrities that were endorsing Hillsong Church, like Justin Bieber, Selena Gomez, Kendall Jenner, Kevin Durant, Kanye West. Like those were all people that were posting about it, and those were what would, I think, be considered those VIPs that were brought in. And yeah, Naomi, I'm curious because you watched the other one, and I want to hear more about Carl Lentz when we get there, but because he was not part of the documentary, as far as like, he did not offer comment. So he was that charismatic pastor that was really at the helm for a while at Hillsong.
I will
Right.
say,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
even though there wasn't a charge, there was a really sad story that talked about an usher volunteer who ushered a new person coming to Hillsong one of the first times, and accidentally sat this person in the VIP section and was told that that person had to leave.
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty. That's not how it's supposed to go.
Well, no, and because essentially the message that's getting sent without it being directly stated is you're not good enough.
Right. You're
And
not special enough. And
that is not the message of Christianity.
Mhm.
Is like, you're not good enough to actually sit at the table. Like, that's what it makes me think of, is
Mhm.
no, there isn't room for you at the table. You're not worthy of sitting at the table. Well, through Christ, we are worthy of sitting at the table.
Right. And it's like, where I feel like that's where church is supposed to be different. It's supposed to not mirror the world, where every other institution that we're part of in the world, like you do come to you have to kind of bring your A game, and you bring your status with you. And then you're given that really good spot. And it's biblical to, don't give the rich person the best spot, because that's sort of the kingdom of heaven is sort of, it's supposed to be different. It's supposed to not be a mere reflection. And so I think that was something that I really noticed, was just like, how is this different than the world? This is exactly like the world, but it's saying that it's God, and it's saying that it's Christianity. And that's what's so dangerous. And that's what really hurts people. So
I'm glad you brought that point up. Yeah. Like I said, I hadn't heard that. So, and I guess I could entertain that maybe there would be some like safety concerns depending on the celebrity. Like maybe they feel like they need a bodyguard with them as they're walking in or out or whatever, if the congregation would swarm. Now, of course, hopefully they wouldn't, but I could see again, I could entertain that as a conversation to be had, but we need to be really careful how we do it. And it's not the VIP section, and it shouldn't be something that's even obvious. Like, the point would be for them not to be the center of attention, versus making it really obvious that like, this is where they are, and being careful again of the message we're sending. So
yeah. And one volunteer or college student, I believe, talked about I think it was the fourth episode of the Hillsong Exposed, and which was that the fourth episode of the docuseries was actually kind of like a recap, or like after they had released the first three episodes, they did like another episode to talk about what had happened after the release. And this person came on and said that they were told how, as volunteers, as students, as people who were not on staff or not leaders, they were told how to treat the leaders, and they were not supposed to look them in the eye. They weren't supposed to engage with them or talk to them. They were, in her words, something along the lines of, we didn't exist except to serve them.
Ugh, just yuck. Well, and I was just thinking, as far as Carl Lentz, because they do spend some time talking about him, and everything about him was VIP. Like I mean, he was treated like a celebrity. He was brought in, you know, it's kind of like, oh, the boss is coming. You know, the staff, the volunteers were all preparing for, it's kind of like if you've seen like Devil Wears Prada, where Meryl Streep is coming to the Vogue office or whatever. And that's kind of what it was. It was just like, let's prepare the way for this charismatic pastor to take the stage. And, you know, and one woman who had been going for like years, she admitted, she was like, you know, when Pastor Carl was preaching, it was like, this guy knows, like, this guy is great to listen to. And she said when other people preached, it was kind of like, well, it's not Carl. So he really did capture his congregation's like sort of loyalty. And again, like you were saying, Natasha, it's like people just sort of, he didn't have time. He didn't have time for anybody. And I think a volunteer also mentioned how, you know, like at any other church, the pastor is available after to just greet people and, you know, is at the door or whatever. That's how it is at my church anyway, too. And pretty much every church I've been to. And there's this availability and this presence that a pastor has, but it was sort of like, you know, locked doors, or he would just be gone. Like he was on to the next speaking engagement. So, you know, it was sort of, again, it was very performative was the feeling that I got.
Well, Naomi and Kat, you mentioned early on the volunteering, how much people were volunteering. And we just got a comment in the chat too about that, about people who couldn't afford to pay rent or buy food, or they were really struggling. And because of the volunteering, you know, Naomi, you've done, you know, a podcast, a blog, like there's been a lot of talk about how like labor, like the abuse of free labor. That was definitely something the docuseries mentioned.
Oh yeah, we have to be so careful in a spiritual, like in a religious context about what we're requiring from people overall, including their time, including their volunteerism, because it too easily connects in people's minds to a works-based faith where it's like, I'm doing this for, or and it can, and so that can get really twisted for people, can get really confusing. And so we want to make sure that if someone's volunteering, it's like, I'm thinking about how I have it structured currently here at Be Emboldened. I'm not saying I don't know if I'm doing it all perfectly, but I am doing it from an educated standpoint and from seeing issues and volunteerism. So whenever we have someone come to Be Emboldened who wants to be a volunteer, we have a conversation. We actually fill out an agreement, and the agreement is really for their protection. And so the agreement fills out, what do they believe their capacity is, whether it's by week or it's by month, and what areas do they enjoy serving, where they feel like it would be a strength or it's something that they're interested in, they want to participate in. How do they want to be communicated with? Are they okay with phone call or text, or they prefer email? If it is phone call or text, what hours of the day, on which days are they available to reach out to? And it doesn't mean they have to answer, but we want to make sure we're respecting and not sending a message at 8 p.m. because like we happen to be working and they're not, and that's a boundary that they have. So we talk through all of these things, and then we schedule monthly check-ins to go over the agreement and see if it's working for them so that we can tweak it, because inevitably when people get into volunteering, they can find out, okay, stuff has to change. Maybe it's, okay, this is actually taking less time than I thought, so I could probably do a little bit more, or I would like to get involved with this new project that just came out. Or, you know what, this just isn't really a good fit. Like what I'm doing for the organization isn't a good fit. Or it's taking way longer than I thought it would. This is a bigger project than I thought I was getting involved in. And so I'm going to have to take a smaller slice of it. And so we want it to be a good, healthy experience for someone where whatever balance looks like in their life, they achieve that. And it continues to be really voluntary. And we can't call our volunteers when we have, through our leadership, through our modeling, the structure that we have, the communication patterns that we have, the nonverbal messaging, including the verbal messaging, we can't continue to call them volunteers if that stuff is saying something different that is manipulating them. This kind of like under the radar manipulation of, no, you need to keep doing this in order for God's mission to get out. Or, you know, and that's one of the big ones, right, Kat, is how you just sit back. Like, it's not necessarily like, oh, you have to do that because they won't necessarily say like, because, you know, Carl's so awesome or because Brian's so awesome. Like, no, you need to do this because the mission is so important. And again, that's where you end up in this it's really a false humility. It's like, it's so prideful to think that God needs you at your church to be doing this in order for his people to be saved. He will save his people with or without you. And it's just great to get to partner with him and what he's doing. But we don't have to do everything. And again, that works-based faith thing can absolutely play into it for people as well, where it seems like there's that line becomes this like really blurred situation of what is for my salvation, what is for like my good graces with God. It can just all get really confusing without anyone saying a word directly about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that what I was kind of doing while I was watching it as well was like I was seeing I was trying to imagine myself as a volunteer and being told to do something that I wasn't that comfortable with, or I felt like I don't have the time to do this, because I've been in a situation kind of like that with like campus ministry, and I just felt like, and then but then I could hear the voice of like, but then what would have like squelched that, like what would have come to convince me to keep doing it. And I kept like doing that because that's what happens is any kind of fear, any kind of questioning, there's always an answer, because it's always like, well, we're expanding the kingdom. So Brian Houston's dream of, becoming this global church that was really, I mean, growing in power, growing in followers and money, right? And of course, like the documentary exposed is like, it's completely it's making it seem like that was always the goal, like for this business model, like that was always the dream, was Brian Houston's dream. But again, you can sort of, you're like, well, this isn't Brian's dream. It's not Carl's dream, even though they're getting a lot out of it. This is the kingdom. So, you know what I mean? Like you can always find sort of a Jesus juke of like why you need to keep doing it, because I don't know, it's just so easy to do. That's why it's just so insidious, because there's always a way to keep control, that goes beyond it's like, it's not just us. It's like, even though, they're benefiting so much, they're receiving so much money. So that was what I was trying to do, is I was thinking, well, even if you did raise some questions, there's always somebody to kind of answer and say, well, but this is for the kingdom. So just ignore those feelings and those doubts and those like gut, your gut's telling you something. Just ignore that, because this isn't about you,
Mm-hmm.
So,
red flag.
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
I'm just thinking about like, gosh, if I found out that there's a volunteer, and I've heard this from people, we actually have, it was one of our very first podcasts. I'm like, do I want you to go back and listen to one of our very first podcasts? But Sarah is her name, and she shared her story, and it was a lot about volunteerism, and she couldn't pay her bills. She was $200 shy every month of being able to pay her bills. So every month she's $200 more in debt, and that's pending nothing happening. That's unexpected. And that obviously happens on a month-to-month basis. And so I'm like, how would someone in leadership not find out about that and say, you know what? Discipleship moment. I really think you need to cut back on what you're doing here. And I think you need to figure out the job, because we are not in a position to pay you for your time, and you need to be getting paid for more of your time. Like, this is not financially good stewardship, and not like that's on you. Like, we just want to clarify, like, hey, we want to head you in a different direction. We want to encourage you to reprioritize your time. And if we have given the impression that this is how it should be prioritized, we apologize.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if we find out about something like that, let's change it. Like, no, don't be here as much. Like, thank you so much that you want to be, say it with gratitude, but let's steer people in a direction that's actually sustainable. And also, if we're in a church environment where the income is so high that, now I'm not here to discuss what is a worker's wages. Like, I that is a tough conversation for anyone to navigate. But if someone can afford really crazy brand names, and then maybe, I don't even know how those were paid for. I mean, I know how some of Brian's stuff was paid for, because that came out in the documentary I watched, The Secrets of Hillsong one, where, I mean, he was buying some of that stuff, $6,500 Rolex on the company, through the the church, which is
Tithing, right?
disgusting. Yeah, so that's a legal issue. But for people who are volunteering a lot, there should be a way if they're like, "Hey, I'm struggling financially," like, we should also be willing to help them, while they're then figuring things out, and we're helping to, again, guide them in a different direction. So I kinda see both sides of it, of we wanna steer someone in the direction of a sustainable practice within the church with their volunteering, like a good theology of it. And also, if there's a transitional time and they're struggling and the church has the funds, then also let's help them make rent and get food. And that's something that I've heard as an issue in many churches is no, we're still expected to tithe. We need and truly tithe in the true sense of the word, like we give 10%, but then if we can't make our bills that month, nobody helps us. What?
Hmm. Right. That feels like wisdom because I feel like I hear the unhealthy voice of leadership saying, well, are you worried that God's not going to provide for you? Like you could keep pushing that. Like, well, but I agree. And I think that if you want to sustainably volunteer and help a cause, like you need to, doesn't it say that in the Bible, like someone who doesn't provide for their family is worse than an unbeliever or something like that. So the Bible does value like taking care of yourself and taking care of your family so that you know can sustainably uh be somebody that like God can say, hey, you know, go work in this church or go do this volunteerism. But I think that you need to be taken care of so that you can go do that. Like you need to be filled so that you can go fill other people. And I think that's a huge like commonality of a lot of ministry is just giving and giving until, you know, it's like I'm emptying myself for Christ. And then people that are unhealthy in leadership roles are going to encourage that. But I mean, that's kind of my take on it. Naomi, if you want to speak to that more. But I think, you know, like you're saying, as a healthy leader, no, you want to encourage healthy boundaries that go for a person and what they're expected to do. So I can see how that can, yeah, go unhealthy ways and what signs of healthy leadership would look like in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to pull that verse. I love the verse you just referenced. So for anyone watching, it's 1 Timothy 5:8, and it says, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Now, I'm not saying that's if someone's on disability. I don't think the Bible's talking about that, or if, you know, if someone got injured or if someone is whatever, there's mental health stuff going on that takes someone out of their job for a period of time. Like this is not just like some other passages in scripture. We have to kind of put it all together and look at, okay, this isn't maybe directly applied. So if you're someone who's listening and you're like, well, I'm on disability and that doesn't provide enough for my whole family every month, that doesn't mean that you're now not saved. But it is a message for the church of, in our direct application here, we shouldn't be requiring this kind of service from people and acting like it's something that spiritually they're actually supposed to be doing. Like this is an ought to. That's not true. It's not an ought to. There are other things that they ought be doing, and we can allow volunteerism be just that and not be coerced in any way. There were a couple of other points I wanted to make, Natasha, before you move on to the next question. So, and I can just list these off pretty quickly, but just some other things that I saw as a flag was just the loyalty, you know, more of that like group thing culture and kind of the loyalty to the movement, more of it being like a movement and a loyalty to the movement versus, you know, which can be so easy to do. It's a caution for all of us, but to make sure we're not setting our eyes on the movement, but we are keeping our eyes on Christ instead. And so that was something that stood out to me. It also stood out to me. So in the Secrets of Hillsong, the one that I watched, Carl shared this story about how, you know, there was a night where he got up at 2 a.m. and woke up his wife, Laura, and they were like prepping these bags of things to like hand out to people on the street. And it was stated like this was a good thing. Like this is how committed, how dedicated they were. And I just saw it as there's almost something manic about it though, like in this kind of lack of boundaries. And I was just wondering, and I can't ask him obviously, so I'm not saying this to incriminate, but just for us to know it's not always good when someone's doing things at 2 a.m., when they're not sleeping and they're not taking a Sabbath rest, whatever that looks like, when they're not, I'm not saying that, I probably shouldn't have phrased it that way for anyone out there who's been a part of like Seventh-day Adventist or any of those. I'm blanking right now, but I do not mean it in that way. I mean just like rest, knowing and understanding and believing that like the Lord's got it and you're going to be fine. So that could be your evening after you get home from work. But just knowing, yes, I'm shutting off my phone or I'm closing my laptop, whatever that looks like, and I'm going to leave work at work and I'm just going to take some time and I'm going to trust that things will be okay. So that's what I mean when I'm saying that. But when I don't hear that, it's more of this like, I'm going, and it's being championed and it's being called a good thing. That to me is a flag. It's a flag for a lot of things, just unhealthy boundaries. It's a flag for burnout and it's a flag for problematic culture for anybody else who's looking up to that person. So it's not what we want to model. The last one I want to mention is just a lack of clarity with the position that the church held for different things. And I'm saying it in past tense because I don't know exactly what all of it looks like now for Hillsong. And so I want to be cautious with that. I don't want to speak about things like it's current. Brian's not there anymore. Carl's not there. There's lots of other people. I don't know exactly the situation right now. So I do want to be careful with that. But there definitely was a lack of clarity. So for example, the gentleman who is same-sex attracted and was attending with his partner and was on the worship team. And he genuinely believed that the church supported his lifestyle. And then he found out via a public statement, which I believe was made by Brian, that the church did not support him and his lifestyle. And that's how we found out. And I'm like, that's horrifying. That absolutely broke my heart for him and his family. That this would be like, oh yeah, you're good. Like, we're good. Like, you do you. And then all of a sudden this public statement comes out. Like, this is personal. These are real people with real lives, and these are real relationships. And so a theme that I saw throughout was Brian treating all of these issues within the media or issues within the church as, oh, I'm just going to make sure that I make it okay with the biggest group of people or with the most important group of people in my mind and screw everybody else. And I just found it absolutely disgusting. So those were the other few I wanted to point out.
Well, and it kind of goes off of, oh, I'm sorry. We're trying to get to the next question. But it kind of goes off too of like he identified maybe like, yeah, powerful people that could help him advance his mission, right? And how how it looked. So yeah, again, very, very consumerist. And there was a quote that I think a volunteer had said, he said, you're supposed to make disciples, not consumers. And so that's kind of what I felt like that was another theme that I saw too. So
yeah. Would you say that the roots of Hillsong in the Pentecostal tradition and the prosperity gospel were also red flags? So we're thinking like maybe theological red flags here. Or are there good parts, truths in those teachings that just got twisted by the Houstons and Hillsong?
So I would say that in regards to the prosperity gospel, it's always a flag because it's unbiblical. So yeah, prosperity gospel stuff is always going to be a concern. And that doesn't mean that nobody prospers. It also means it's not necessarily financial when we prosper. So I'm not speaking against the idea of prosperity, but when we talk about the prosperity gospel, we're talking about a specific set of beliefs. And yes, I would hold to the prosperity gospel as being unbiblical. So that would always be of concern. In regards to Pentecostalism, no, I don't think Pentecostalism in and of itself is a red flag or a concern. Like, there is definitely room for Pentecostalism in scripture. I think it's the hyper charismatic stuff that can happen, and like heading into like the new apostolic reformation thing. So heading into NAR, that's where we're now crossing the biblical line, and it is not only a flag, it's flat out a problem. And so I'd say with prosperity gospel and with like that hyper charismatic / NAR stuff, those aren't necessarily, I don't think they're necessarily synonymous, but heading again, or not heading, they're across that line. And so those things I'd be concerned with. But I don't think, again, Pentecostalism in and of itself is now here's kind of why I'm saying it slowly. For me, it's a flag. And so I want to acknowledge that for anyone else who's watching where you have seen it go really wrong. For me, I get extra cautious. But I know that's because I've experienced the bad versions of it, not because it's always bad or everything about it is always bad. And so for me, it's a flag of caution. I would say like a yellow flag where I'm just going to take it slow and investigate. And in some areas, just stay away from it because it's not something that I can do myself. But I recognize that's not necessarily the case for everybody, and that's okay.
Yeah. I guess like my question kind of going along with this was because the roots were in something. So I said Assemblies of God. So is Pentecostal and Assemblies of God the same thing? Like I guess I was confused by that. Because I wrote Assemblies of God roots and then but it kind of evolved.
Yeah, Assemblies of God at least originated with Pentecostalism.
Okay. And so Brian, I think it's interesting because Brian like kind of learned from other prosperity gospel leaders like spiritual entrepreneurism, and he had this kind of like manifesto of like what the church I see, which I think, we could be like, oh, like Martin Luther King Jr., like I have a dream, kind of like had similar kind of language, but I kind of wonder. So my question is, was this always his goal? And was it always a bad goal? Like, was it always something that he was trying to personally profit from? Because so the Hillsong Exposed really did focus on how their music was sort of the doorway that opened so much of the rest of the world for Hillsong, because their music is so good. I mean, right? Like Oceans. I remember that came out in college, and that captured me. It captured, I think they were on like the Today Show. It felt like, oh my gosh, it's a crossover. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, they're showing this music with this like deep message, that's, it's the gospel, right? And they're showing it broadcast on this secular network. So I was really excited about that, I remember. And so they talked about it in the documentary like it was musical and emotional manipulation. And it was basically designed to extend Brian Houston's dream of the church I see, which is international and connected, and I guess powerful. So, but again, I mean, that speaks to your question, is like, was that always bad? Like, was that because we are, or is he a little deceived? Like, I don't know, because we are told to go into all the world, preach the gospel, right? So, and music is a powerful way to do that. Like, I just feel like there's sort of a side of it that gets really manipulative, but it's also, I still feel like their music has some really good meaning to it. So it's like, I don't know. So I guess that's something I'm kind of grappling with. So was that always his goal and his design? Because he did make some choices that really did feed that spiritual entrepreneurism and that ability to use the to kind of captivate the audience. And I just think that's interesting. And I know they licensed their music globally, and they changed their name to Hillsong Church because their music was really taking off. So I don't know, was that always the goal, or did they just go with it? It's like, okay, this is what we're told to do in the scripture. We're supposed to go into all the world. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of what you're asking, but I'm just wondering what you guys think about that.
Yeah. So in Secrets of Hillsong, they brought in another element that it sounds like may not have been in the one that you watched, where they showed how, I don't know if I'm going to get this exactly right. At some point, Brian traveled to the United States. Natasha, do you know what I'm referencing? I'm not sure if you saw this part.
Yeah, I only watched like the first episode of
that one. Okay. So he traveled to the United States and he got involved. I don't know if it was the church he was attending or, and you guys please forgive me for not remembering the exact specifics, but basically he got involved with a church or trainings or something like that that were prosperity gospel. And then he came back and that's when he started putting out books about in the prosperity gospel vein and started really going after tithing and extra giving and all of these kinds of things. So that's really, I guess, where that, or at least where the docuseries is saying that influence came from and when that took off.
Mm, that makes sense. So there was like, that was the point, and that was
Turning point. Yeah.
yes. So yeah, so the roots, and I think that the Hillsong Exposed, I think, really focused on how the music was the gateway and opened the door. And I think maybe it's because I personally really like the music that it is kind of hard to separate the two. Like, I don't know. So it's interesting.
Well, maybe we should talk about that. I mean, that was one of the questions I wanted to address is, are there cautions that we should think about as we're listening to Hillsong music? Is it something that we need to not listen to? Should churches not be playing Hillsong music in their churches on Sundays? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Kat, do you want me to go? So here's my thoughts on it. I struggle to financially support an organization that has this unhealthy or this abusive leadership. Now I realize I likely do support such places. Like I don't know anything about the leadership at the grocery store I go to, but once I know, I know. And so I think it's something to at least think about and to take seriously. And when it comes to this area, like being an area of passion and strong conviction for me personally, being like the area of spiritual abuse, like I just can't because I'm so disgusted by it. That like I don't hear a Hillsong song now and feel like and think, wow, God, you're amazing. Like that's just, I hear it and my stomach turns. And so I just have a different response to it. But I think that can vary. I think there's room for there to be variance there and not have it be like there's something wrong with the person. I guess what I would add though is like, even with that feeling, I feel heartbroken for the people who are like, they're honestly like creating this beautiful music with these beautiful lyrics, like for the glory of God. And I think it's so unjust for them to suffer the consequences that are not necessarily theirs because they might not even know what's happening or what was happening and so I do see that part of it too where I'm like this is just it's tragic. The other part I want to mention is that just as we do see New Apostolic Reformation themes in Bethel music that can be sneaky and kind of slippery, I think we should consider the themes in Hillsong music too, because I think there's some themes there that may not fully align with biblical truth. And so something for us to be aware of. And I think, have some of that caution, knowing that the church is coming from that prosperity gospel bent, that, okay, where is that maybe coming through? And making sure that we're not agreeing to things we don't actually agree with.
Yeah, I agree. I think you brought up such a good point that the people writing the music, like their hearts could have been completely pure. And even though it was mentioned by a volunteer that church was very strategic in that there would be sort of like, it was like test audiences. So because they had their church and then they would obviously license it globally to grow. And to get those messages out there, right? And so not all those messages are bad, but it is a perfect platform in which to, if you have an agenda, that's a great way to get that out there. And again, just like how everything was marketed, it's very shiny, it's very appealing, and so it goes down really smoothly. And I think that it's hard when it's sort of serving you in a way. Like you're like, look, following Jesus is like cool, well, it is, but I'm just saying like I feel like too, there's probably even for Christians who feel like the world often kind of mocks Christianity. There was this really cool version of it, right? Like Hillsong kind of represented what it was touting, that it was all this Christianity, you know, but it was cool. Like, it's no longer lame to be a Christ follower. You know, look at Carl Lentz, look at these people. So I think we have to kind of think about like, what was that appeal, and like, why is it still kind of hard? You know, I have to just share, because I shared this with someone that I was going to be doing this live stream, and I said, did you hear about like Hillsong and kind of what really kind of happened, and sort of the behind the scenes? And they said, you know what, I just don't really care, because I love their music. And they're like, you know what, I just can't, kind of like, I can't think about that. Like, almost like I don't want to be disappointed. And unfortunately, like, whenever we're putting our faith into something that's not Christianity, like true Christianity, not Christ the rock, like, we're going to be disappointed, because it's human beings. And so we should never have put them in that place of God. But I can see how that meets sort of a need or a desire for somebody who is a Christian, who's like, you know what, I want to be cool. I want to belong to this, because look, you know, it's getting endorsed by my favorite celebrities, you know? So they were just brilliant. I mean, that is really the seeds of what Brian Houston was doing, was just these seeds of a very, consumerist, like, appealing church that was really easy for people to want to be part of. Like, they had lines out the door every week at their New York location. So that's why it was so effective, I think.
Yeah. A lot that I don't know so much about Secrets of Hillsong, but I'm curious to kind of tie the bridge here. That the Exposed documentary talked about was Carl Lentz's fall from grace and how Hillsong handled that. So I'm just curious, like, what sorry, you guys, I just saw a dog outside that I thought was my dog, but it's not our dog. So anyways, like, oh no, how'd that dog get out of the kennel? If Hillsong was a healthy church, how would they have handled the separation with Carl Lentz? Like, what could have been done in a way that would have said, okay, that they handled this well, versus how they handled it was maybe a red flag, or just a symptom of how unhealthy that culture was?
Yeah, I have a list.
Let's list them off.
Okay. So, and some of this came from the follow-up in the one I watched, so in Secrets of Hillsong. So some of this you guys may not have seen, but they would have said what needed to be said about what had gone on, because we do need some sense of transparency. Like, you can't just have somebody disappear. That creates other problems like abandonment. And so we do need to say something about, this is what happened. So, you know, discernment and what needs to be shared, what doesn't necessarily need to be shared. And so share what needs to be said, and then stop talking about it on public platforms. Now, that doesn't mean we stop talking about it with people who are needing to process, but it was like several months later, or even more than that. I can't remember the exact time frame, but it was a significant period of time later where Brian Houston just brought Carl back up in a public interview on his own, and just was talking about concerns with Carl and things like that. And it was just like, why? Like, it's just not necessary to do that. So saying what needs
Unless
to be
you
said,
have a bad objective, right? Like, unless you're like, I need to make sure everyone knew that I'm not the bad guy, that Carl Lentz was the bad guy.
Exactly. Yes. Like, just, he's not there anymore. It's been addressed. Like, let it lie. As far as, I mean, and I get where maybe if he was asked a question, and he could even, you know, politely say, you know what, we've said what has needed to be said, and we're wanting to respect the family's privacy now and move forward. I mean, it was just so classless the way it was handled. They would have offered support for his congregation, including the leadership team, like staff and volunteers, and they would have ensured everyone had a confidential way to get connected with help if they too had been harmed. So I don't see where anything like that has happened. Like, obviously, and I'm not saying that they necessarily been harmed by Carl, but just like, hey, we've had something come to light in the church. We want to make sure everybody's okay. Like, is everyone getting to process this as they need to? Has anyone else had an experience? And if so, we want to make sure that people are getting supported. They would have offered and supplied Carl and his family with any psychosocial, emotional support that they needed. You know, if we have someone who is repentant and is struggling, then his church family should have been there for him. Somebody should have shown up. They should have funded the care that they needed. They should have made sure that he was set up. Again, like, get him connected with the support services that he needs. Don't just say, oh my goodness, now this is a scandal on the news that's going to make us look bad and maybe people won't give us so much money, so we're just going to cut him off and get rid of him. No, like, if the family is going through something, they have served you. Like, I mean, I know it looks like Carl made a lot of money. He probably did make a lot of money. The church made a lot of money because of him. So it's like, I think it's so unethical on absolutely every level. I'm not saying that just because of the money they should have supported him. We should have done that if there was no money. But I'm like, this is just, again, it sickens me. So moving on to the next point. Oh, also, Laura mentions in Secrets of Hillsong that they had a daughter who was taking things very hard, and there were suicidal concerns. And this was communicated to Bobby Houston, and things still kept rolling as the Houstons decided to have them roll, or whomever was in charge of that. And so that's upsetting to think that we wouldn't be taking the well-being, again, of the children and the family into serious consideration as we're navigating our way forward. I also have that, let me see. I had just, my note for myself was like, the dude had worked hard as well. And yes, he was disqualified from leadership, 100%, but he wasn't disqualified from the community of Christ. And I think that was wrong. And Laura should not have lost her job because of her husband. The fact that they fired Laura when she had not done anything, at least as far as we're aware, unless the docuseries like covered something up, like, the married couple being so connected in church leadership is ridiculous. Like, all of this stuff where it's like, oh, the husband's on staff, and so it means the wife is basically owned now as well, and she's also going to work 40 hours a week. Like, this was actually an issue. My husband was looking for a job in between where we live now. It was like, so it would have been like a year and a half ago when we were making a transition. And there was a church that he was looking at working for, and he was even offered the position. It was a really big holdup that I worked for Be Emboldened, because I wasn't going to be able to pour into what they were doing. I'm like, but my husband can, and he's the one you're paying. Yeah, but you're not able. Well, but I'm not on your, like, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have anything to do with me. I fully wholeheartedly support my husband. And so I see some of that in them letting Laura go. Now I get that she was being paid, but I'm like, it doesn't have, there needs to be a separation here. And I understand they're one, and yet they're also not, if you know what I mean. Like, we're one as in we're coming together, but we're not literally morphed into one body. We are two people made in the image of God and uniquely designed as his son and his daughter. And so I think that she should have, like, in retrospect, it may have been in her best interest not to be there because of everything that went down. But I think she should have been given a leave of absence for her to get the care that she needed, and they should have come alongside her in that, and the position should have been held for her. So should she have wanted to return? It makes no sense. I think that's wrongful termination. Again, unless there's something that I'm aware of, but based on what we can see in the docuseries, she should have still had a job. And then lastly, I had noted that I think they would have put policies into place for care of their team in regards to prevention. I mean, if we see that people, I think there needs to be a more well-rounded approach of when we have people putting so much into their environment, into their job, into something that they're working on. And we're seeing what's demanded of volunteers. I don't know what was demanded of Carl. Now, he says when he speaks that, like, it was a lot. He didn't realize just, like, basically how exhausted and burnt out he was. Now, I would have a hard time imagining that there wasn't a lot of pressure in his position, a lot of pressure to perform, a lot of pressure to bring in money. And we need to make sure our people are supported and that they have the ability to come forward and say that they do have a need. And it doesn't look like in any way that was the case at Hillsong. Now, again, none of this is to excuse the choices that Carl made. He still made the wrong choices. He made incredibly harmful, bad choices. And again, I agree that he was disqualified from leadership, but that doesn't excuse the other party. This isn't like, oh, well, he did that, so everything the other party did, they're off the hook. No, they're on the hook too, because they did a lot of things wrong. And I think that we need to look at what policies and procedures and what is our culture? Like, can people come forward if they're having a hard time? Like, do they know that they can say, like, I don't have the capacity to maintain this. This isn't sustainable. Like, do they have permission to do that? Do they know that they won't lose their jobs? Do they know that they'll still be cared for and they'll still be valued as people, again, made in the image of God? And I'm just like, I just don't see any hints of that through any of these documentaries, that Hillsong had that kind of culture. It looks like it was no, you perform, and that's what you're here to do. So there wouldn't be any room to come forward either. Again, none of this disqualify, is like, you got to take it all together.
Kat, do you have any thoughts you wanted to share about how the firing and situation was handled?
I didn't know that Laura was fired from her position because, Secrets of Hillsong Exposed, sorry, didn't go into that. And I guess like I'm just thinking too about how, he, as much as he did do wrong, it did feel like a scapegoat situation where Brian Houston was all about him and like touting him and just like they were doing interviews all the time together until that happened. And then Brian Houston then subsequently steps off after sexual misconduct himself, which he still wants an active role as founding pastor. So he clearly is not feel like there's not really remorse, it seems. There was a volunteer, I really liked this quote. He said, if we want restoration, it has to be preceded by genuine sorrow or contrition. So the truth needs to be told, first of all, which I feel like it is being told. But I guess I'm curious too for the future of Hillsong and like the structure that's in place now. It did feel like a big PR thing that they just got rid of a ton of their founding board. I think this was in the wake of some of the financial tithing concerns coming out. They just got rid of a bunch of their board members, replaced them with female board members. So that did not feel genuine. That felt like a cover up. And so I guess I'm curious is like, okay, well, maybe they have people there now that can they go beyond this? But I think that just knowing that Brian Houston still is wanting this role, like, I mean, he is the founder. So who's to stop him at that point? So that's a little concerning if there is a future for them. Like, is he just going to be more behind the scenes? Because I don't think he's going away.
Yeah, that seemed very evident. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Naomi, especially in light of, since you watched The Secrets of Hillsong. In Megachurch Exposed, it talked so much about Carl Lentz and about what happened, but they said many times they had tried to reach out to him and they had not in the production phase had not received anything from him. And I think that's how it ended too, is they sent him like a letter because like nothing else had worked. But Secrets of Hillsong, he was interviewed. So after hearing so much about Carl Lentz from that perspective of Hillsong Exposed, what are your thoughts about what Carl Lentz shared himself in his own words in Secrets of Hillsong?
Yeah, I was pretty upset by the comparison between the two series. I think Brian handled it badly, handled the situation badly, and I think the Lentzes were kind of hung out to dry, so to speak. So again, and I'm caring about Laura here, and I'm caring about the children. And I'm also caring that, yes, someone had a quote unquote male moral failure, to kind of use our Christian language for that. And it didn't seem like there was any consideration of, do we need to help the family somehow, though? I mean, because they're still together, you guys. I did not expect that when I watched the docuseries. I was shocked that they're still married and they're still working through things and they're rebuilding as a family. Like, there could have been an opportunity there to be a part of that repentance process, a part of that forgiveness process, that learning to trust again, to rebuild. And Hillsong decided not to be a part of it. And I think that is tragic that they weren't, because this was their church family. This was the Lentz's church family. And again, it doesn't remove Carl's issues, but I think it added to the problem rather than helped. And then again, like I said, Brian bringing him up months later, like unprompted, just there was one moment where, so Carl shares in one of the episodes that he had experienced childhood sexual abuse, and that he can identify that through him receiving therapy. He can identify that as a point that kind of set him up on a trajectory of this kind of sexual morality struggle. And I believe this was an editing cut. I can't remember 100%. I thought he even was wearing something different in the cut. Maybe he wasn't, and they had just switched camera angles, but there was definitely like a cut and a jump. And so I feel pretty confident that it was done in editing, where he acknowledges his wrong and like apologizes for it, and then immediately shares that he had experienced child sexual abuse, that he had suffered in that way. I didn't love the two being edited together. I think saying acknowledging the child sexual abuse immediately after the apology made it kind of confusing of like, well, are you saying it at like, why the timing? Like, what's going on here? I'm definitely a believer that like when we apologize, we just let the apology be. And then we'd absolutely talk about anything else that comes into play, but we want the apology to be a beginning and have a period. And so I didn't love that editing cut, but again, I don't think that that's actually how Carl did it. I think it was done in editing, because then later on he talks a bit more about it, and he was very appropriately vulnerable regarding what this was like and the connection, between the two. And I think the honesty of him and his wife about how it's been and where they're at was really helpful as a viewer to see. I did not see narcissism, again, other than potentially that editing cut. If it wasn't, there was something a little off about that. It wasn't quite right, but they were pretty real about what it's been like in their marriage, like the struggles, what it's been like for their family. And it wasn't like they tried to do what Brian Houston did, where it's like blame it all on Carl. They didn't try to turn around and blame it all on Hillsong. Like they owned stuff as well. And so it just seemed like a more kind of balanced perspective of what had happened, and there was ownership in it. And it was really great to see the progress that has been made. I do want to note that there were limits on what they could share, and they couldn't say anywhere near as much as you could even feel at times that Carl probably wanted to say more. But guess why they couldn't? Why do you think the Lenses could not fully share in the docuseries?
Red flag number 1, signing an NDA.
Thank you. Exactly. And why on earth do we have nonprofit organizations getting NDAs signed?
Well, they weren't
Nonprofit.
even nonprofits, they were LLCs.
Well, no, the church is a nonprofit. The music label is an LLC.
Well, and all
So
the colleges and everything, like in Megachurch Exposed, they went through like Hillsong having like 30 some
there's
LLCs.
a
I
lot of
thought they
stuff
were,
going on. Yeah.
I
I
thought
thought
they were
I
really
thought
close.
he at the church. I thought him
Yeah.
at the church was a 501c3 because of the donation aspect of it. So I guess
Either
we
way.
could double check that. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about a religious organization, or we're talking about, like, there's supposed to be transparency. Like, you're supposed to be able to know what's going on. And again, that whole like, let it be in the light, guys. And so why are we needing people to sign things? I was having a conversation with someone recently who shared about how, in order for the individuals at their church who had been religiously abused to have mediation with their church, to have a mediation conversation, they had to sign an NDA. What in the world?
Our litigious
Red flag.
How is this happening? And I'm like, that needs to be published. This is not okay. If we mess up, we own that we messed up. And if people want to take it to the news, then we can share our apology along with the story and how we're going to make it right, which might be removing ourselves from our positions. We do not take people's voices away. And so that in and of itself, I'm like, what on earth is going on here? Because the message that was given in Secrets of Hillsong was NDAs were common practice for leadership. Why? This is messed up, especially when you have Brian Houston, who he did get acquitted. So I'm going to leave it that he got acquitted. We'll leave it there. But he was brought up on charges for potentially hiding all of the sexual abuse his father had committed, child sexual abuse. And so why are we now having NDAs in his churches where we're now legally hiding stuff? I'm like, this is a mess. And that's from like, that really gets me. I'm like, I don't think I could have anything to do with it. And I pray that all the good people who have poured in there, that they come to the truth of who Christ actually is. Like, God have mercy on the harm that has been done here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking about like how they had these volunteers that I remember one of them was visibly emotional and was in the church in Boston, I think. And she just had such a difficult time. And like, I guess my heart is really, as much as it's like we all want to focus on these, like, and the documentary focuses on these larger than life figures, it's like, let's remember the people that really showed up and volunteered and were, pouring themselves out. And now they've discovered so much of that was a lie. And so much of that was for human advancement, not really what they thought it was. And so I do pray that they really meet the real Jesus, and that they find, they need to find being emboldened as one of the ways could be, but just that they find Jesus himself, and that he is revealed to them, because this would be devastating to find that out. And that was very evident in the volunteers and staff that were interviewed.
I also just want to throw out there, Natasha, before we head into our last question, like if there's anyone out there where this just resonates and it's familiar in your story, or if this reaches some people who were a part of Hillsong and have gone through this experience and you poured so much in, it is amazing how God works through these messes. And so please know that it wasn't all for nothing. Like, it's not all wasted. People did come to Christ because of things that happened at Hillsong. And so if you were someone who was a part of that, like, then you were a part of that. And so I want to always be cautious of painting it as all like black or all white. Like, there's gray there. And there's good, like God works that good. There's redemption through it. And so please know that if you found out you were a part of something that you wished you hadn't been a part of, it wasn't all wasted. It's not going to be wasted in your life, even though you probably never want to go through it again, which is definitely how I feel. And I don't think it's wasted in others. I mean, I had some really great moments with Hillsong music and things like that where it was really impactful in my journey, and it does mark it, even though, like I said, I don't know that I could listen to it and not have a pit in my stomach anymore. God uses things and he works through things. So
amen to that. Thank you, Naomi. That's the kind of hope that we want to leave with people too. So thank you for bringing us back to that. What have these docuseries showed us about the impact of spiritual abuse? Kat, I think you were starting to answer that question, but Naomi, I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, well, if I can, as I was listening, I actually had written down some of them are quotes and some of them are just paraphrases, so a bit of a mix between the two, but I was writing down some different things that people said. And so I'm going to read those. One person said, "This will be the last church I attend on this side of heaven." Someone else said, "I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't know the big existential answers to questions, but I don't find that so terrifying. There's a peace there. I'm a really happy atheist." And then Laura Lentz, Carl's wife, said, "It's a process. It's sad because I love the church. There's a lot of unhealthiness in the church, though. It's not God's heart, and it's not what Christianity is supposed to be." And I'm so thankful for her, for how she put that. I think she captured it really well. And again, that was a paraphrase, so I didn't get it exactly word for word. But I think when we look at the impact of this, we see that it's long lasting, and we see that people sometimes leave the church and sometimes they leave the faith, and both are tragic. And when I looked at when I heard the person who said, "I'm a really happy atheist," it made me think about how it can be more peaceful than the pain and the confusion of still feeling connected or bound to a system that was corrupt and in so many ways broke you. And yet I couldn't shake for myself the difference between Jesus and them. But even that statement, raises a lot of really good questions that need answers. And as far as like attending church again, that's hard for so many people, and understandably so. And it's been really hard for me in my journey. Like, you're trying to figure out, who can I trust? And so I really don't mean this as a plug for Be Emboldened, but there just aren't a lot of people doing this kind of work and coming alongside people in these kinds of ways. And so if any of that speaks to you, whatever your story has been, whatever your suffering has looked like, if you have experienced some kind of spiritual abuse, these are questions that we care about. And we don't only talk to people who are Christian at this time. We talk to people who are atheists. We talk to people who are agnostic. And we're not coming at it from like, we're trying to convince you and like make you believe. No, like, you have important questions that have come out of the suffering you've had. And we want to navigate that with you. And you're going to land where you land. And that's for you to decide. But I would encourage you to figure out what are the possible answers to it, along with someone who's going to care that it really deeply connects with your heart and with your soul. And these aren't only intellectual questions. And that's something that we really value here.
Thank you, Naomi. It's true. We're not trying to plug our name to make it bigger and grander, and we're not just here to talk about this stuff. We're not just here to rail on Hillsong, like Naomi said, to make it black and white and talk about how terrible they are. We see the people who've been impacted by this, and we want to see them get the help they need, and not just hear about it, but actually make change toward it. So one thing practically that we are offering right now is 3 different curriculum options for the fall that are launching this fall. If you're curious about what that could look like and how it might help you, we are actually doing tomorrow a live stream about it and answering any questions that people may have, talking about these curriculums. One of them is called Rebuilding After Religious Abuse. We've talked about that, how that's a journey, it's a process. Some of the questions Naomi just mentioned about figuring out how to trust people. There's a whole series of questions we ask about, can I trust people? Can I trust myself? Can I do this? Can I do that after experiencing religious abuse? And then there's a third curriculum that's brand new that's talking about rebuilding with biblical literacy, especially when the Bible, when the names of Jesus, when the things that are taught in legitimate Christianity are used against you. How on earth do you recover? How do you open up your Bible again when a verse has been explicitly used against you to take advantage of you, your time, your finances, all the examples that we mentioned today? So please check out the link. We are registration is open. We love to answer your questions, and you can find out more about that tomorrow. Registration's open through October 1st. Naomi, Kat, are there any other closing thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Kat, I think I just want to end with, I don't feel good about these conversations. Like, I'm not leaving this conversation like, oh yeah, they suck, or oh yeah, like, just don't have anything to do with them, or like, this is hard. This is, again, I've used the word tragic a few times, and I mean it. And so I would encourage others to look for that emotional connection to it, so that it doesn't just become another story or another reason to not, another reason to turn away, but allow ourselves to connect with it and to make choices based on what comes out of that connection for us. So for me, I can recognize, wow, I want to do something about it. It's motivating for me. It gives me this continued sense of purpose. For someone else, maybe it connects. It's like, yeah, I'm upset. I need to talk to someone about it. I need to tell my story. I need to work that through with someone. I need to maybe turn towards it instead of turning away from it, because obviously it's tapping on something when it comes up. So whatever that looks like for you, I would encourage you to, I guess I would discourage you from having it be just like another tally of another church, and here we go again. I don't want us to become desensitized to the pain of others, because then we'll stop doing something about it.
Mm-hmm. No, like, well said. I totally agree. And I am grateful. Like, I'm just grateful that Be Emboldened does exist. And I think that it just does speak to the need that exists. And I think too, I just want to add that, we've talked about various documentaries, and maybe there's a person that thinks that, well, I went through something like Hillsong. I didn't go through something as intense as like, keep sweet, pray, obey, or something like that. But I don't care the level of what you would call intensity, or, it's, we just heard some accounts of how people are turned away from Christ. And so wherever you are at, like, don't minimize that. Don't minimize the trauma that you've had, because you've been through something. And I don't know, because I think that sometimes we see it as like, well, I didn't go through that big thing, but just know that you still have pain, and you still may have questions, as Naomi mentioned. And again, the result is a lot of people, Christ was misrepresented to them through this. And so however that looked, that matters. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. And there are resources, and there's people that care. So kind of like you were saying, Naomi, but grateful to be part of this conversation, because I know for me, I had a history of really being like, I loved Hillsong, and I just felt, and I'm still kind of living those questions too, right? Like, how can they rebuild this? Do I listen to this music? This has given me some food for thought, and I hope that it has for others as well.
Well, thank you all for being with us today. For anyone who's watching or rewatching, we just really appreciate your support and being in this with us. We want to serve you and help you in your journey. So thank you for following along. Please share, spread the word. If there's people that need to know about this, we want them to know. Thanks all. We look forward to seeing you in October for our next live stream.